The Galactic Training Academy on Station Athenaeum 5 was, by all accounts, a miracle of interspecies cooperation. Sleek corridors hummed with translated chatter from 100 different worlds. Holographic displays cycled through mission briefings in languages that would make a human linguist weep with joy, or possibly frustration, hard to say which. The station orbited a binary star system because, of course, it did. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Everything about this place screamed prestige, excellence, and the kind of pompous self-importance that made you want to roll your eyes so hard you could see your own brain. And there, in the lower maintenance wing, armed with the industrial-grade mop and the growing suspicion that her life choices had been questionable at best, was Elena. 8 months. She'd been here 8 months, and her job title, cultural liaison, was the kind of diplomatic euphemism that really meant they needed someone to clean up after the species who couldn't figure out that waste disposal units were, in fact, universal. The pay was decent enough to keep her from catching the next transport back to Earth, but not good enough to make her feel anything other than resigned about the whole situation. "Another den, another credit," she muttered, pushing the mop across a floor that had seen better centuries. The translator implant in her ear helpfully converted her Russian into something the station's AI could log. Not that anyone was listening. The thing about Athenaeum 5 that the recruiting brochure hadn't mentioned, and oh, there had been a brochure, all glossy promises and images of noble cooperation, was that it had a problem. Not a small problem. Not even a medium-sized, we'll figure it out eventually problem. No, this was a legitimately impressive disaster. Somewhere in the upper training levels, there existed a class of 6 juvenile aliens who had, in the span of 2 months, systematically destroyed the confidence, patience, and in one memorable case, the will to live, of 11 qualified instructors. 11. That wasn't incompetence. That was anomaly. That was art. Elena had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The maintenance crews traded tales like currency. There was the time Crawl, the Mandathian youngster built like a biological battering ram, had thrown a training dummy with such force that it punched through a reinforced viewport. Reinforced? Those things were rated to withstand meteor impacts. There was the incident where Felnix, the Vishari cub with reflexes that made mockingbirds look sluggish, had somehow reprogrammed the gravity plating to only affect the instructor. Nothing else. Just the instructor, who spent the entire session pinned to the ceiling while 6 youngsters did absolutely whatever they wanted below. The Grothian kid, Womel, had sat on an emergency exit for 3 hours once. Just sat there. Wouldn't move. The instructor had begged. The kid just sat. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetically expensive. Each failed instructor cost the Academy a fortune in severance packages and reputation damage. The latest casualty had been Commander Thulmar, and that's when Elena knew things were truly, monumentally broken. Thulmar was a legend, decorated war hero, survivor of the Trigon campaigns, the kind of alien whose mere presence made junior officers stand straighter. He'd walked into that training hall with 3 centuries of combat experience and the confidence of someone who'd stared down extinction-level threats. He'd walked out 8 days later and submitted his resignation before he even left the building. Elena had been mopping up the wreckage. Literally, there was some kind of bioluminescent fluid everywhere when she'd seen him leave. The look on his face wasn't anger, wasn't even frustration. It was the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd been broken by forces they couldn't comprehend. 6 kids, 6 alien kids, had done that. She was still thinking about it, pushing the mop in lazy figure eights, when the shadow fell over her. Shadows, actually. Plural. Multiple tentacles worth. "You!" came the voice, and Elena looked up to find Vexnala looming over her in that special way that only a 4-meter-tall administrator with prehensile limbs could loom. The head administrator's skin was cycling through colors that Elena's implant helpfully translated as stress, desperation, and something that roughly approximated, "Please, for the love of all that is holy, help me." "Me," Elena agreed, because what else was she going to say? "You're human." "Last time I checked, yeah. You've been here 8 months. Little over, actually. 8 months, and—" Elena pretended to count on her fingers. 12 days. But who's counting? Vexnala's tentacles twitched in what might have been irritation. Hard to tell with her species. "You're teaching the advanced youth cohort tomorrow?" Elena blinked, then blinked again. Then laughed, because surely this was a joke. Some kind of elaborate prank the senior staff played on the maintenance workers to break up the monotony. "Good one. You almost had me there." "I am completely in earnest." The laughter died in Elena's throat. She looked at Vexnala's face, searching for any sign of humor, and found only the glazed desperation of someone who'd run out of options and was now throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. "You want me," Elena said slowly, "to teach the class that just broke Commander Thulmar?" "Yes." "The class that's gone through 11 instructors?" "Yes." "The class that, and I want to be clear, I'm just repeating rumors here, once started a small fire in a zero-combustion training facility." "That was actually Baluk, the Skaran youngster. Sonic resonance ignited a coolant line." Vexnala said this like it was a minor footnote, not a physics-defying catastrophe. "But yes, that class." Elena set down her mop. This required both hands for the gesturing she was about to do. "Okay, let me see if I understand the logic here. You've sent trained warriors, decorated commanders, species with literally centuries of teaching experience. All of them failed, and your solution is to send the human who cleans floors." "I am aware of how it sounds." "Do you? Do you really? Because it sounds unhinged." "I am desperate," Vexnala said, and there was something almost pleading in the translation. "We've tried everything. Motivation protocols, disciplinary frameworks, reward matrices, technological compliance measures that border on unethical. Nothing works. They are not malicious. They are not unintelligent. But they are completely, utterly unmanageable by any conventional standard." "And you think I can manage them because—" "Because you're human," Vexnala said, like this explained anything. "Your species has a reputation." "For mopping? For the unconventional?" Elena snorted. "That's a diplomatic way of saying we're weird. You survived a death world, developed space travel while still engaging in tribal warfare, and your idea of entertainment includes willingly experiencing fear for pleasure." "Yes. Weird is accurate." Vexnala's tentacles twisted together in what Elena had learned was the equivalent of wringing hands. "I have nothing left to lose. The Galactic Council is threatening to shut down the youth program entirely if we cannot resolve this. Those 6 youngsters will be separated and sent to corrective behavioral facilities. I am out of options, out of time, and apparently out of my mind. But I am asking you to try." There was a long silence. Somewhere down the corridor, a maintenance drone beeped its way through a cleaning cycle. The binary stars outside the viewport cast double shadows that danced across the walls. Elena thought about Earth, about transit costs, about the fact that her contract paid just enough to keep her here, but not enough to leave. "What's the pay bump?" she asked. Vexnella's skin flashed a color that translated as relief so profound it was almost embarrassing. "Triple your current rate, instructor-level benefits, and if you succeed where others have failed, a permanent position with full accommodations." Triple. That was ticket-home money. That was start-over money. That was look, I actually made something of this disaster money. "Fine," Elena said, surprising herself. "I'll do it, but I want that in writing, and I want access to their files tonight." "Done. Training Hall 6, tomorrow at the start of cycle. The youngsters will be waiting." Vexnella's tentacles were already reaching for her datapad, typing out contracts with the speed of someone terrified Elena might change her mind. "They're going to eat me alive. You know that, right?" "Possibly. But perhaps they'll learn something while they do it." And that's how Elena went from mopping floors to being responsible for the 6 most notorious youngsters in the academy. With about 16 hours to prepare and absolutely no idea what she was doing. She spent those hours reading files that read less like educational records and more like incident reports. Kral, the Mandathian, was a wall of muscle and hormones going through his species' equivalent of puberty, which apparently made human teenagers look calm by comparison. Mandathians were a warrior culture, which meant Kral had been raised on concepts of honor, strength, and dominance from the moment he could walk. He wasn't mean. He was just very, very sure that might made right, and he had a lot of might. Felnix, the Vishari, was a different kind of problem. Feline species, predator instincts, and intelligence sharp enough to gut you with words before his claws ever got involved. The file noted that he'd scored in the top percentile for tactical thinking. It also noted that he'd used that tactical thinking to orchestrate a prank that locked an instructor in a supply closet for 6 hours. The door had been unlocked the whole time. The instructor just hadn't thought to check. Wummel, the Grothian, looked like something that should be hibernating in a cave system, all bulk and fur and gentle eyes that completely lied about his capacity for stubborn, immovable resistance. His file had a note from a previous instructor. Not aggressive, not hostile, simply will not comply. Have never encountered such passive resistance in my entire career. Nish, the Chirathi, was the only female in the group, and her file made Elena's head hurt. Insectoid species, hive mind adjacent, except Nish had been separated from her hive collective as an infant for reasons the file didn't specify. That meant she had all the biological drives toward collective behavior, but none of the telepathic connection to make it work. The result was a youngster who was unpredictable, prone to rapid mood shifts, and deeply, deeply lonely in ways she couldn't articulate. Baluk, the Skaran, was amphibious, which meant the training facility had to maintain both dry and aquatic sections. His species communicated partially through sonic frequencies, and when upset, Balak could emit sounds that ranged from merely annoying to actually damaging to hearing-based species. One instructor had been medically cleared for temporary deafness. The file noted this in the same clinical tone you'd use to describe a weather pattern. And then there was Loomis, the Ethon, energy-based consciousness housed in a containment suit, because existing in normal space-time was apparently negotiable for their species. Gender wasn't applicable. Emotions were expressed through color shifts and temperature changes. The file had very little concrete information about Loomis, except that they were considered a prodigy among their kind, and also possibly the most temperamental of the entire group, which was saying something. 6 kids. 6 completely different species, biologies, and psychological frameworks. And somehow, Elena was supposed to teach them something. She closed the files around 3 in the morning, station time, and stared at the ceiling of her quarters. "Well," she said to no one in particular, "this is either going to be really impressive or really, really humiliating." The smart money, she figured, was on humiliating. But at least it paid triple. Training Hall 6 was bigger than Elena had expected, which made sense when you considered it needed to accommodate species ranging from human-sized to significantly larger than human-sized. The space was circular, with reinforced walls that had clearly seen some action. Scorch marks here, dents there, one section that looked suspiciously like someone had tried to eat through it. The lighting was adjustable for different visual spectrums, currently set to something that approximated Earth daylight, probably from her file. Elena walked in carrying exactly 3 things. A thermal container of coffee that was probably against some regulation somewhere. Her personal data tablet that still had her maintenance schedules on it because she hadn't bothered to clear them, and absolutely 0 expectations of success. The cubs were already there. Of course they were. Probably had been for a while, working themselves up into whatever chaos they'd planned for today's entertainment. Crawl, the Mandathian, was the first thing you noticed because he was the size of a small vehicle, and currently attempting to tear a secured equipment locker off the wall. Not with tools, just with his hands, his muscles bunching under scales that looked like they could deflect small arms fire. His tusks, because of course he had tusks, gleamed in the overhead lighting as he grunted with effort. Felnix, meanwhile, had somehow gotten himself onto one of the overhead fixture platforms, a space that was definitely not designed for occupancy, and was casually grooming himself while his tail swished with the kind of deliberate nonchalance that screamed, "I know exactly how much this annoys you." Wummel had parked his considerable bulk directly in front of the emergency exit, not blocking it aggressively, just sitting there, taking up space, his eyes half closed like he might actually be asleep except for the way his ears tracked every sound in the room. Nish was on the ceiling. Literally on the ceiling. Because apparently Chirathi could do that, her multiple limbs allowing her to cling to surfaces in ways that made Elena's human brain file a complaint about physics. She was clicking to herself, a rapid-fire sound that the translator couldn't quite parse into words. Baluk was in the aquatic section, which was really more of a reinforced pool set into the floor, and judging by the way the water was rippling, he was doing something under the surface, something probably inadvisable. Loomis was hovering, actually hovering, containment suit and all, near the center of the room, their energy field pulsing through colors that cycled from orange to deep violet, and back again. The temperature around them was noticeably warmer, like standing, near a space heater that had opinions. 6 sets of eyes, or eye equivalents in Loomis's case, locked onto Elena the moment she cleared the threshold. And then they waited, watching, calculating. This was the test, Elena realized. This was always the test. The new instructor walks in, sees the chaos, and immediately tries to establish dominance, control, authority. They yell or threaten or try to physically intervene, and boom, the game begins. The Cubs had probably run this play 11 times already. They knew every variation. So Elena did the one thing none of the previous instructors had apparently thought to do. Nothing. She walked calmly to the side of the training hall, found a bench that looked only mildly damaged, and sat down. Unscrewed her coffee thermos. Took a sip, made a face because it had gone lukewarm, and then pulled up her tablet to check what the maintenance schedule had her doing tomorrow. Because if this imploded in the next hour, and it probably would, she'd need to know which sectors needed cleaning. The silence in the training hall was profound. Kral stopped trying to rip the locker off the wall. His hands were still on it, but he'd frozen mid-pull, his head turning to look at her with an expression that might have been confusion. Felnix's tail stopped swishing. He'd actually paused mid-grooming, one paw still raised to his face, staring down at her from his perch. Even Nish had stopped clicking. Elena scrolled through her tablet, pretending to be fascinated by the notification that Sector 8 needed a biohazard cleanup. She took another sip of coffee. "So," Felnix said finally, his voice carrying that particular feline drawl that managed to sound bored and curious at the same time. "You're the new one." "Yep," Elena said, not looking up. "You know we destroyed the last instructor, right? Made him quit. Commander Thulmar. War hero. 3 centuries of experience." "Heard about that. Sounds like it was impressive." Another pause. Longer this time. "You're not going to try to make us do anything?" This was Kral, his voice deeper than Elena had expected, with a rumbling quality that she could feel in her chest. "Right now? No." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes with the kind of casual directness that came from spending years in customer service back on Earth. If you could handle someone screaming about their coffee order, you could handle a teenage alien twice your size. Probably. "Seems like you're busy. Don't want to interrupt." "Interrupt what?" Wummel asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was surprisingly gentle, like someone who'd spent a long time learning to modulate it so he didn't accidentally intimidate people. "Whatever this is." Elena gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. "The locker thing, the ceiling gymnastics, the emergency exit situation. You've clearly got a whole routine going. Who am I to mess with artistic expression?" Nish dropped from the ceiling, landing with a click-clack of limbs that should have sounded threatening but somehow just sounded curious. She tilted her head, compound eyes reflecting fractured versions of Elena. "You're mocking us." "No," Elena said honestly. "I'm just really tired. And this coffee is terrible. And I'm trying to figure out if I should have negotiated for quadruple pay instead of triple." "You're being paid extra to deal with us?" Felnix sounded offended. "Good. Offended was better than violent." "Well, yeah. You're the class that broke 11 instructors. That's got to be worth hazard pay." The water in Baluk's pool churned, and his head broke the surface, amphibious features arranged in what might have been surprise. "They told you that?" "They told me everything. Showed me your files, the dummy through the viewport, the gravity plating hack, the 6-hour sit-in." Elena counted them off on her fingers. "The coolant fire was particularly creative. I didn't even know you could ignite coolant." "You can if you hit the right resonance frequency," Baluk said, and there was something almost proud in his tone. "Huh, physics was never my strong suit." Elena took another sip of coffee, made another face. "So here's the thing. I'm supposed to teach you something. That's literally my job now. But I'm also supposed to survive the experience, which seems statistically unlikely based on the track record. So I'm thinking we maybe try something different." "Different how?" Loomis asked, their voice coming from the suit's speakers with a faint electronic overlay. The colors in their energy field had shifted to something that looked almost like curiosity. Pale blues and greens. "Well, for starters, I'm not going to stand here and yell commands at you. That's clearly not working. And also, I don't have the lung capacity for it. Humans aren't built for sustained shouting." She set down her tablet. "Second, I'm not going to pretend I know more about being a Mandathian than Kral, or a Vishari than Felnix, or any of the rest of it. You know your own species better than I ever will." "Then what are you going to teach us?" Kral's hands had dropped from the locker entirely now. He was facing her fully, arms crossed, but the aggressive posture had shifted into something more defensive. Waiting. "I have absolutely no idea," Elena admitted. "I was mopping floors yesterday. My qualification for this job is that I'm human, and the administrator is desperate. So I'm probably going to make this up as I go. And it's probably going to be a disaster, but at least it'll be a new kind of disaster. You've already done the destroy the instructor thing 11 times. That's got to be getting boring." There was a beat of silence, and then Felnix laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that was more of a sharp bark, but distinctly amused. "She's right. It is getting boring." "The last 3 were basically the same," Wummel agreed, shifting his weight slightly. Not leaving the emergency exit, but acknowledging the conversation. Same speeches about discipline and honor. Same threats about consequences. Same assumptions that we're broken and need fixing," Nish added, clicking softly. Elena felt something shift in the room. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of something that could eventually become trust, given time, and a miracle or two. "So," she said, leaning forward slightly, "Kral, what's actually fun on Mandathia? Because this whole smash things routine seems pretty repetitive for someone who's probably got actual interests." Kral blinked. His nictitating membranes slid across his eyes and back, a gesture that the translator didn't bother to interpret because it was pure physical reaction. "Fun? Yeah, fun. Entertainment. Things you do that aren't destroying training facilities." Kral seemed genuinely stumped by the question. "Combat trials, strength competitions, honor duels. Those all sound like work wearing fun's clothing," Elena said. "Come on. What do you do when nobody's watching, when you don't have to prove anything?" Another pause, longer, and then, quietly, "I like building things, structures. My hands are good for it, strong enough to shape heavy materials." "Yeah? Like what?" "Made a dwelling for my family's nesting grounds. Took me a season, but it held through the storm cycles." There was something almost vulnerable in his voice now, like he was admitting to a weakness. "They said it was good work." "That sounds way more impressive than ripping a locker off a wall," Elena said honestly. "It doesn't prove strength." "Kral, you're the size of a tank. Nobody's questioning your strength. The locker thing is just redundant at this point." Felnix made that barking laugh again. "She has a point." Elena turned her attention to the Vishari still perched overhead. "What about you? What's fun in your world that isn't elaborate pranks?" "Pranks are fun," Felnix said defensively. "Sure, but they're also work. Planning, execution, waiting for the payoff. What do you do that's just for you?" Felnix's tail started swishing again, but slower, thoughtful. "I like hunting. Not for food, for the puzzle of it. Tracking, predicting behavior, understanding the terrain. That's basically tactical analysis. It's different when you're doing it because you want to, not because someone's grading you." "Fair point." Elena turned to Wummel. "And you? What's the deal with the emergency exit thing? Just comfortable? Or making a statement?" Wummel's ears twitched. "Both. It's warm there. The airflow is better. And nobody can make me move unless I want to." "What would make you want to?" "Good reason, not orders. Reasons. Like? Someone needing to actually use the exit for an actual emergency. Someone asking nicely instead of demanding. Someone offering something more interesting than sitting here." "Okay, that's honest." Elena looked at Nish, who was still closer than the others, her multiple limbs folded in a way that suggested she was ready to bolt at any moment. What about you? What's it like, being disconnected from your hive? Nish went very, very still. They told you about that. It was in your file, but I'm asking what you think about it. It's loud, Nish said quietly. My head. It's supposed to have other voices in it, and it doesn't, so there's just noise, all the time. Noise trying to fill the space. That sounds exhausting. It is. What helps? Movement, activity, having things to focus on. But they keep trying to make me sit still and pay attention to things that don't matter. Define doesn't matter. Things that don't help with the noise. Lectures about protocol, formation drills, history of the academy. Nish's voice was getting slightly high-pitched, stress creeping in. Things that just make the noise louder because I'm supposed to be quiet and listen, but I can't be quiet because then it's just the noise and nothing else. Elena nodded slowly. Okay, that makes sense. What about you, Baluk? What's your deal? The Skaran had pulled himself partially out of the water, webbed hands gripping the edge of the pool. They don't understand sonic communication. They hear it as noise, or attack, or disruption. But it's how I think, how I express, and they keep asking me to be silent. That's like asking someone to stop breathing, Elena said. Yes, Baluk said, and there was relief in his voice at being understood. Finally, Elena looked at Loomis, who had drifted closer during the conversation, their energy field now a calm blue-green that felt warm but not aggressive. And you? What's the temperature changes about? Emotion, Loomis said simply. Heat is excitement, anger, passion. Cold is sadness, fear, withdrawal. Instructors kept treating it as a threat. It's not. It's just how I exist. So when you heat up, you're not trying to hurt anyone. You're just feeling things intensely. Yes, Elena sat back, coffee now completely cold and forgotten. Okay, so here's what I'm hearing. You're all dealing with instructors who see your natural behaviors as problems to be fixed instead of things to be understood. Kral's strength is threatening. Felnix's intelligence is insubordination. Vumel's boundaries are defiance. Nish's need for movement is disruptive. Baluk's communication is noise. Loomis's emotions are dangerous. She looked at each of them in turn. That about sum it up? Slow nods. Careful agreement. Yeah, that sounds miserable. No wonder you broke 11 instructors. I'd be smashing things too. You're not going to try to fix us? Kral asked. You're not broken, Elena said, and meant it. You're just kids who've been told that being yourselves is wrong. That's not a you problem. That's a them problem. The silence that followed was different, softer, less hostile. Wummel shifted slightly, no longer blocking the emergency exit quite so completely. Nish's clicking had stopped entirely, replaced by a stillness that suggested focus rather than flight. Even Kral had completely abandoned the locker, standing with his arms at his sides instead of crossed defensively. So what now? Felnix asked. Now? Elena checked her tablet, mostly for effect. Now I finish this terrible coffee, and you all do whatever you want for the rest of this session. And tomorrow we try to figure out something actually useful. Deal? That's it? Baluk sounded suspicious. That's it. I'm not going to force you into compliance on day one. I don't have the energy, and you'd just fight me anyway. We'll build up to the actual teaching part. This is the weirdest instruction session I've ever had, Loomis said. Good, Elena replied. Weird is kind of my species' specialty. And for the first time since Elena had walked into Training Hall 6, nobody was destroying anything. They were just 6 youngsters, standing around, talking to an adult who actually listened. It wasn't much, but it was a start. What Elena didn't know, and wouldn't know for another 3 days, was that every single one of her sessions was being recorded, analyzed, and scrutinized by a Galactic Council assessment team that had descended on Athenaeum 5 like bureaucratic vultures circling something that smelled like failure. The observation room adjacent to Training Hall 6 had become command central for this operation. Screens displayed multiple angles of the training space. Biometric readings tracked stress levels, aggression markers, and compliance indicators that apparently existed for measuring such things. And seated in the center of this technological circus was Counselor Nalvesh, an avian species whose plumage seemed perpetually ruffled by the sheer audacity of what he was witnessing. "Day 8, he said, his voice carrying the particular disdain of someone who'd been forced to watch something they found personally offensive. "The human has accomplished exactly nothing measurable." Vexnala, who'd been relegated to nervous observer status, twisted her tentacles together. "The destruction has stopped." "Absence of destruction is not education," Nalvesh countered, gesturing at the screens where Elena was currently sitting cross-legged on the floor, while Nish explained something about Chirathi hive communication patterns. "She sits, she listens, she asks questions. Where are the drills? The discipline? The structure?" Perhaps structure isn't what they needed. Every species needs structure. It's fundamental to civilized society. Nalvesh's feathers bristled. This approach cannot be quantified, cannot be replicated, cannot be standardized across the academy. She's simply talking to them. "And they're talking back," Vexnala pointed out. "Kral hasn't attempted property damage in 6 days. Felnix is attending every session voluntarily. Even Loomis has stabilized their thermal output. Anecdotal improvements are not data." But Nalvesh's tone had shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping in around the edges of his certainty. On the screens, Elena was laughing at something Baluk had said, the sound carrying through the audio feeds. The cubs, all 6 of them, were clustered around her in a loose semicircle. Not at attention, not in formation, just present, engaged, listening. It looked absolutely nothing like a training session. It looked, Nalvesh thought with growing discomfort, like a family. "The council has demanded a formal demonstration," he said finally. "Standard protocol compliance testing, public evaluation. If she cannot prove these youngsters will follow commands in a structured environment, the program ends. The cubs will be separated and remanded to corrective facilities." Vexnala's skin flashed alarm red. "When?" "5 days. That's not enough time." "It's more than enough time to prove whether this experiment has any merit." Nalvesh stood, his robes settling around him with administrative finality. "Inform the human. The assessment will take place in the main arena. Full audience of instructors, administrators, and council representatives. She will demonstrate command compliance using standard protocols. And if she refuses? Then we have our answer, don't we?" After Nalvesh left, Vexnala remained in the observation room, watching Elena on the screens. The human was showing Wummel something on her tablet now, both of them looking at what appeared to be construction diagrams. Kral had moved closer to see, his massive head tilted with genuine curiosity. "Please," Vexnala whispered to no one in particular, "let this work. Because if it didn't, 6 youngsters would be torn apart and shipped off to facilities that specialized in breaking spirits and calling it correction. And Elena, who'd stumbled into this situation with nothing but exhaustion and honesty, would have to watch it happen. The assessment was coming. And nobody, not Vexnala, not Nalvesh, not even Elena herself, had any idea how it would end. Elena found out about the assessment when Vexnala appeared in Training Hall 6, during what had become their usual morning session. The administrator's skin was cycling through colors so rapidly it was almost strobing, which even Elena's limited understanding of her species recognized as extreme stress. "We need to talk," Vexnala said, and the cubs immediately picked up on the tension, their attention snapping from whatever they'd been doing to the doorway, where the administrator stood like a harbinger of doom. "That phrase has never preceded good news in the history of language," Elena said, but she stood, brushing dust off her pants. "Give me a minute." She walked over to where the cubs had clustered together, their body language shifting into something defensive. Pack mentality, she'd learned. Threaten one, you threaten all. "Hey," she said quietly, "whatever this is, we'll handle it. But I need to talk to Vexnala alone for a few minutes. Can you guys just hang tight? If she's here to shut down the program—" Crawley started, his voice dropping into that dangerous register. "Then we'll deal with it together. But let me get the information first before we decide how angry to be about it." Elena met his eyes. "Trust me?" It was the first time she'd asked that directly. The cubs exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them that transcended species. And then Felnix flicked his tail in agreement. "Fine, but we're listening through the door." "I'd expect nothing less." Elena followed Vexnala into the corridor, and the moment the door sealed, the administrator's composure cracked. "The council is demanding a formal assessment. 5 days. Public demonstration in the main arena. Standard compliance protocols." Define standard compliance protocols. Commands, formation drills, obedience demonstrations in front of an audience of academy staff and council representatives. Vexnala's tentacles were knotting themselves into increasingly complex shapes. "They want proof that the cubs will follow orders." "Orders," Elena repeated flatly. "Yes." "From me." "Yes." "In front of a crowd." "Yes." Elena leaned against the wall, processing this. "And if they don't perform like trained animals for the entertainment of bureaucrats? They'll be separated, sent to corrective behavioral facilities. The program will be terminated." Vexnala's voice dropped. "I'm sorry. I tried to argue for more time, but Councillor Nalvesh insisted. He believes your approach has produced no measurable results." "No measurable results," Elena said, her voice carefully neutral even as anger started building in her chest. "Kral hasn't destroyed property in almost 2 weeks. Nish can sit through entire sessions without spiraling. Baluk is communicating without sonic attacks. But sure, no measurable results? I know. But the Council requires quantifiable compliance data, and what you've been doing doesn't fit their metrics." Vexnala reached out with one tentacle, a gesture that might have been meant as comfort. "Can you do it? Can you get them to follow commands in a high-pressure environment?" Elena thought about the cubs, about how far they'd come, about the trust that had been carefully, painstakingly built over the past 2 weeks. "I don't know. Maybe. But it's going to have to be on our terms, not theirs." "What does that mean?" "It means I need to talk to the cubs. And then you need to trust me. I've been trusting you. Then trust me a little more." When Elena returned to the training hall, 6 pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of worry and anger. She sat down in her usual spot, and they converged around her without being asked. "So," she said, "you probably heard most of that." "The door isn't soundproof," Felnix confirmed. "They want us to perform. They want to see if I can make you obey commands, in front of an audience, and if you don't, they're going to split you up and send you away." The silence that followed was heavy enough to have mass. "We could refuse," Kral said finally. Make them try to remove us by force. You could, Elena agreed, and you'd probably take down half the station doing it. But then what? You'd still end up separated, just with more trauma and possibly criminal records. So we just comply? Wummel asked, his voice sad. Prove that they can break us? No. Elena leaned forward. We show them something they're not expecting. We demonstrate that commands work when they're built on respect instead of fear. But I need you to understand what I'm asking. I need you to follow orders in front of people who don't deserve to see it. People who think your problems to be solved instead of individuals with value. Why would we do that? Nish asked, her clicking rapid with agitation. Because it keeps you together, Elena said simply. Because it proves that my approach works, which means other instructors might actually learn something. And because sometimes you have to play the game long enough to change the rules. Loomis drifted closer. Their energy field pulsing with colors Elena had learned meant deep thought. What commands? That's what we need to figure out together. They'll expect military formations, aggressive compliance, you jumping when I snap my fingers. We're not doing that. We're going to do something that shows you can follow instructions while maintaining your dignity. Like what? Baluk asked. I have some ideas, but I need to know if you're willing to try. Another exchange of glances. That silent communication again. What do you need from us? Kral asked. And so they planned. 5 days later, the main arena was packed. Elena had never seen so many different species in one place, all of them arranged in observation tiers that rose up around the central performance space like a gladiatorial arena, which, she supposed, wasn't far from the truth. This was combat, just with different weapons. Commander Thulmar was there, his expression carefully neutral, but his posture radiating smug anticipation. Other instructors clustered in small groups, recording devices at the ready. The assessment team occupied the highest tier, Counselor Nalvesh at the center. His plumage arranged in what Elena was pretty sure was disapproval, made manifest. Vexnala caught her eye from the administrative section, tentacles twisted into shapes that looked like prayers. And then the cubs entered. The crowd noise shifted, whispers rippling through the tiers. Because the cubs weren't snarling or posturing or radiating aggression. They walked in calmly, grouped together, and took positions near the center of the arena without being told. Elena walked out to meet them, and the arena fell silent. All right, Nalvesh's voice boomed through the speaker system. Instructor Elena, you may begin the standard compliance demonstration. Instead of responding to him, Elena turned to the cubs, just looked at them for a long moment, these 6 youngsters who'd trusted her enough to be here. Ready? She asked quietly. 6 nods. Then she turned back to face the tiers, projecting her voice to carry. With respect, Counselor, we're not doing standard compliance demonstrations. Those focus on obedience through dominance, which isn't what we've been building. Instead, I'm going to show you what cooperation looks like when it's based on mutual respect. Murmurs from the crowd. Nalvesh's feathers ruffled dangerously. That is not, he started. Kral, Elena said, cutting him off. Can you show them what you built last week? The Mandathian moved to the equipment area, selected materials, and began assembling a structure. Not destructively, constructively. His massive hands worked with surprising delicacy, creating a framework that demonstrated both strength and precision. Phalanx, tactical analysis of the arena layout. Exits, defensive positions, optimal observation points. The Vishari rattled off the information without hesitation, his assessment sharp and professional. Wummel, You mentioned your species are excellent at conflict mediation. Can you explain the principles? The Grothian did, his voice carrying clearly, articulating concepts about de-escalation and mutual understanding that had the crowd actually leaning forward to listen. Nish, show them the communication patterns you taught me. The Chirathi demonstrated her movements precise and purposeful, no longer chaotic, but channeled into something beautiful. Baluk, can you give us the sonic sequence we worked on? The Skaran complied, producing sounds that harmonized instead of hurt, a demonstration of control and artistry. Loomis, temperature regulation exercise. The Ethon's field shifted through colors with deliberate precision, showing the range they could maintain, the control they possessed. And through it all, every request was followed. Not because Elena demanded it, but because the cubs chose to respond. The arena had gone completely silent. Elena turned back to Nalvesh. These youngsters don't need to be broken. They need to be understood. And when you actually bother to see them as individuals instead of problems, they're capable of extraordinary things. This is not standard protocol, Nalvesh said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. No, Elena agreed. It's better. She looked at the cubs, these 6 youngsters who'd been labeled impossible. Sit, she said simply. And they did. All of them. Not snapping to attention. Not military precision. They just sat, comfortable and calm, waiting to hear what she'd say next. Because that's what you did when you trusted someone. You listened. The arena erupted in noise, but Elena didn't hear it. She was too busy watching Nalvesh, watching the moment his certainty cracked, watching him realize that maybe, just maybe, the humans had figured out something the rest of the galaxy had missed. You didn't command respect. You earned it. And once you had it, you didn't need to command anything at all.